In this video, I'm going to teach you how to create horror adventures for your tabletop RPG games and give you some tricks on how to actually make them scary. Also, by the end of this video, I will give you my #1 trick to really scare your players. I'm Razumazu and I'll be your game master for today. Before starting a horror game, you should consider what horror is. Compared to other genres of role-playing, it is a bit more tricky to get the right mood going. But you also need to consider how scary the game should be, which will depend on your particular group. To balance these things, you need to understand just a little about the horror genre, but don't worry, I will help you. And if you like videos that help you become a better role player or game master, please remember to like and subscribe, because that is what this channel is all about. The first place where horror tabletop games are different from other types of scenarios is that horror is not a plot or a special story. It is a mood that you're trying to convey through everything that happens in your game. And this is where it starts to get tricky, because the mood is not there for the characters, it's there for the players. You want your players to feel an underlying discomfort, but not necessarily fear, throughout the game. This feeling will affect the actions they have their characters perform, but I should stress that it's not about making your players feel fear as such, it's more of a mood you want them to get into. You should also know that horror role-playing games is not dependent on any specific system. It can be done in all systems from Dungeons and Dragons to Star Trek. Of course, some systems are more suited for horror, because they are specifically written to support some of the things I will tell you about in this video. But overall, horror role-playing is not system specific. Now let me give you an example of the mood I'm talking about. Remember when you were young and you heard a scary story? The story was scary and all, but what really scared you was probably the feeling afterwards when you had to go through a dark hallway to get to your room. It is this mood or feeling that you want your players to experience. So think of it as if you are setting the mood for a scary story. Everyone knows it's a story, but the feeling of fear can stick in the body even though the story is over. But horror is not just about fear, though fear is often a typical reaction to it. It's also about making your audience feel discomfort, and you can do that through other means than fear. Examples could be making them feel repulsion towards something or someone, or maybe disgust of something you describe for them. The thrill or rush we get from horror comes from this discomfort. But it's important to not cross the line from discomfort into a place where it is no longer fun. Watching a horror movie is fun. If you suddenly get stabbed during the movie, not so fun anymore. I know that not everyone enjoys horror games or horror movies, and that's why you absolutely need to talk to your players about boundaries before you design your adventures. It's important to know if they have any particular topics they don't want to roleplay in your game. This could be bodily mutilations, graphic murders, and a lot of other things. Talk to your players, give them a couple of example subjects, and see how they react. If you just ask, is there anything you don't want to be mentioned in our horror game, they probably won't know what to say. But if you ask them directly if they are okay with an adventure about solving child murders, it will be easier for them to imagine playing through such a game and give you an answer. From their answers, you can probably find a line of horror which you should avoid crossing. Now let's talk about the different kinds of horror you can build your game around. A lot of people think of horror as involving monsters or ghosts, but monsters and ghosts is something you can put into many genres of horror. And the genres are what sets the overall mood and feeling for your particular horror game. I'm going to go through a couple of horror genres now, but always remember that you can mix these up. And you can switch completely between them. So one game session might be about cosmic horrors, while another might be a ghost story. Mix it up and keep your players guessing, especially the moment you feel that they are beginning to feel safe in the particular genre you've picked. Now let's look at the genres. Body horror is about a fundamental human fear, the fear of our bodies failing, getting sick, aging, dying. We rarely think about what goes on beneath our skin. We all understand that our organs work together and keep us alive, but we rarely think about how they do it or what can be happening in this perfect biological system. Maybe parasites are living in our brains, maybe tumors are growing somewhere in us right now, or maybe some kind of worm we accidentally ingested is moving around in our intestines right now. And this probably proves a point I made earlier in this video. I bet you are feeling discomfort right now thinking about parasites inside you. That is the feeling you want your players to have at the gaming table. When using this genre of horror, I suggest you focus on this feeling of not knowing, the lack of awareness, and what is really happening. This doesn't have to be something happening in the characters, but it could be something living in the well infecting a village, some kind of zombie parasite, or whatever you can come up with. The unknown of what is happening, but knowing that it is biological and inside bodies, is what creates the discomfort. Focus on showing how even healthy individuals can in fact be incubating something terrible, hungry, and malicious. Think about how the Alien movies do it. Something horrible is inside your friends. How do you deal with that? The genre often focuses on blood and gore, but remember that it could also be about swapping minds to other bodies, finding perfection to create the ideal person, or maybe just changing whole worlds through biology. One thing I do need to mention is that this genre has a history of portraying disabilities as something monstrous, so be aware of that and avoid it. On to the next genre, which is my absolute favorite. Cosmic horror. I'm a big fan of the role-playing game Call of Cthulhu. It is probably my favorite game, not so much because of the system used, but because of the inherent cosmic horror in the game. That particular game is based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft, who in many ways was one of the founders of cosmic horror. When that is said, I am aware that Lovecraft was the definition of a racist jerk, and only parts of his work is worth reading, but that doesn't change how much he affected the world of horror. Cosmic horror revolves around the fear of personal insignificance. The genre tells us that entities exist that are so vast and so genuinely beyond our comprehension that we cannot fathom their simplest motivations. To see or experience them is to become lost in their magnitude, and we have never, will never, or could never matter to the cosmos at large. It is the feeling of staring up at the stars and feeling insignificant, magnified by 1,000. That is the discomfort you want your players to experience at the gaming table. The genre focuses on how alien forces might alter us, perverting our expectations and understanding of autonomy, debasing our minds and separating us from what makes us human. Sometimes it's something we invite ourselves, and sometimes it just happens to us as an accident of circumstance. We try to not go mad and just hope to survive. In this genre, you should focus on loss of control, a sense of insignificance, and a universe that is completely indifferent to you because you don't matter at all. There are some tricks you can use when creating games involving cosmic horror. First of all, try to be vague. Cosmic horror emerges through imagination of the indescribable, so not through details. Try to make the characters feel unmoored from reality and make sure the motivations of the cosmic forces are never understandable. Logic should be broken, and even though your evil NPCs might have motivations throughout your games, I suggest you often change these motivations so your players never figure out what is going on. Cults, forbidden books, and strange symbols should be thrown in wherever you need them, because the cosmic horrors are so unfathomable that putting players up against them directly makes no sense. But a cult worshipping these horrors, that's more manageable. Now, let's talk about folk horror. Folk horror adventures involve traditions, beliefs, and perceptions that are passed down through generations and take terrifying twists. Those who follow these hidden traditions believe that it is perfectly normal to sacrifice to strange gods and monsters in the dark woods. But for outsiders, these practices seem cruel and evil. The folk horror genre explores fears of isolation, superstition, paranoia, and lost truth. Seemingly idyllic communities, forgotten traditions, and nature cults are frequent in folk horror. In folk horror tales, characters often discover that their beliefs aren't as universally held, and those beliefs provide no defense against those who reject them. In such stories, characters discover their perception of the way the world works is in the minority, as those around them practice traditions beyond their understanding. Communities that ascribe to traditions of folk horror stories are rarely tolerant of non-believers. Outsiders might be given a chance to adopt the community's ways, but otherwise are considered heretics or corrupting elements. Blasphemers are definitely not treated kindly. Creating games in the folk horror genre often involves dangerous traditions, mystical festivals in villages, or symbols and art. The followers of the traditions often try to hide it because they know that the rest of the society and the world won't accept it. Remember that your NPCs strongly believe that these traditions is what keeps the world safe. They must sacrifice a baby every year to keep the dimensions aligned, or bathe in blood to avoid getting sick, or whatever. But remember that the beliefs held by the communities might not be true. And you should build on the discomfort of that knowledge, and the knowledge of not really knowing if it's true or not. This will keep your players on their toes throughout the game, because are they unwittingly about to release something even more evil? Or are they doing good? Now let's talk about the classic ghost stories. Ghost stories number among the more psychologically elaborate genres of horror. Only through revealing tales of tragedy and past wrongs can heroes truly bring peace to forces that share their suffering with their living. Ghost stories touch on fundamental issues of human existence, the nature of the soul, the weighty fact of mortality, and the burden of ancestry and history. Spirits represent instruments of supernatural justice, plunging those responsible for their deaths into a living hell where they suffer for their sins. They also represent grief and the need for closure, lingering in a place until they bring about the completion of the work they hope to accomplish in life. Remember that all hauntings have a deep story, and it is the small details that tell it. Small clues should be everywhere, and part of the ghost story should be for the players to figure out why the ghost is there. Remember that not all ghosts are evil, and not all ghost stories need to end with the ghost being freed or killed. The ghost genre does not have to be the plot. When designing your adventure, try to build personal ties into it, because it is the personal ties that brings weight to the story. Consider having the characters tied to the ghost somehow. Maybe an ancient evil ghost turns out to be the forefather of one of the characters, and the only way for the ghost to be put to rest is for that character to die. On that note, if the point of your adventure is to remove the ghost, then always give the players some way of putting the spirit to rest. Finally, the discomfort in this genre is about the tragedy of being trapped as a ghost, but also about pure fear. Look for ways to test your players' psychology with hauntings and strange things that go bump in the night. Now let us talk about how to create discomfort and make your game scary. First of all, should you tell your players that they are about to play a horror game or not? There are advantages to both. Telling your players that they are about to play a horror game will have the same effect as telling someone that they are about to see a scary movie or hear a scary story. It will prime them to get ready for the discomfort feelings they know from other movies. And it will also make them think about their characters' actions in the game. If you know you're about to play a horror game, you also know that the monsters or NPCs you meet will get scarier than the ones you usually meet. Because of that, the player will most likely make his or her character behave accordingly. The other option is not telling the players that they are about to play a horror game. If you want to do this, you should first try and learn what their boundaries are. As I mentioned earlier in this video, you don't want to accidentally trigger something in one of your players and make them not enjoy the game anymore. The advantage of not telling your players, probably players who are not playing a horror campaign, is that you can create some really fun WTF moments for them. However, I do prefer telling the players because I feel that the priming of knowing you're about to play a horror game outweighs everything else. Now, how do you make the players feel discomfort? Here's a couple of tricks to do it. One thing you should do is make the players feel helpless. You need to do this without taking away agency from them. The players should always be allowed to do the things they want to do. But you should make it so the odds against them just feel incredibly overwhelming. In horror, it is perfectly normal to just run away from the scary things and not stay to fight. If you have a particular combat-hungry player group, you should probably explicitly tell them this before the game. I know I said earlier that horror is not system-specific, but this does mean that making a true horror game is more difficult in game systems like Dungeons & Dragons, where players are heroes with hundreds of hit points. Making players helpless is easier in systems like Call of Cthulhu, where a single bullet or claw to the head will most likely kill the character. But if you're playing a game with powerful characters, you can bend the rules so all the things the players usually do with their cool spells and weapons won't work in the specific case of whatever monster they are fighting. Just make sure that they then have the option to come up with other solutions, maybe running away first. Now let's talk about horror scenes. Your game is most likely built around different scenes or locations that your players engage with. It is in these scenes you need to create events that make your players feel discomfort. It can be difficult to come up with events to put in your scenes, but one trick I often use is to think about what scared me as a child. I'm not talking about specific scary monsters, but again I'm referring to those thoughts you had as a child that made places scary. It could be the thought that something might be waiting for you in the dark hallway, or something might be right behind you on the staircase, or maybe something scary lives down the drain in your bathroom. You should try to remember all these strange fears you had as a child and then build those into your scenes. That's the first step. The second step is to think about what makes people in general feel uncomfortable. Things like walking alone through the park at night, showering while home alone, torture of innocent people, children being hurt, animals being hurt, domestic violence, racism, religion. The list is almost endless. These are all subjects that will create some kind of emotional response in your players, and it will make them feel discomfort. And this is the point where you need to be careful. Don't cross the line of horror you've agreed with your players. Keep things interesting and engaging for everyone at your table. If you combine a genre, scenes built on childhood fears, and then add some kind of event that everyone will feel discomfort about, you are on your way to create a horror experience for your players. Just remember, don't cross the horror line. In the beginning of this video, I promised to tell you my number one trick to scare my players. So here it is. It is quite simple but very effective. Take something completely normal and make it strange. This will make your players highly suspicious, which creates discomfort. Some examples could be make the bus driver constantly stare at the player characters, or describe how the otherwise perfectly normal doctor is drooling a little bit from the corner of his mouth every time he talks to one of the characters. Or maybe have the fluid he puts in his syringe look a bit strange just before he gives it to one of the characters. Maybe have the usually crowded train be empty and quiet. Maybe have the empty swimming pool have rings in the water as if something just moved. Take the normal and change it just a little bit, and then focus on describing that bit. Your players will get scared. I hope you found this video useful. Please remember to like and subscribe for more content like this. This is Razumasu, signing off.